Mike spent 9 years as an active duty Navy print and broadcast journalist and 21 years as a Navy civilian writer and Air Force public affairs officer, retiring from federal service in 2008. Mike is originally from College Park, Maryland, and he's a 1974 graduate of the University of Maryland. After meeting Thomas E. Devine, author of Eyewitness, the Amelia Earhart Incident, in 1988, Mike became convinced that Devine, Fred Gorner, and Paul Brand Jr. and other Earhart researchers were correct when they proclaimed the presence and death of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan on Saipan after their disappearance in July of 1937. 14 years of collaboration with Devine produced With Our Own Eyes, Eyewitnesses to the Final Days of Amelia Earhart, published by a small Ohio company in 2002. His second book on the Amelia Earhart case, called Amelia Earhart, The Truth at Last, published in June 2012, greatly expands upon the important eyewitness accounts of former American GIs who participated in the 1944 Battle of Saipan, presented in With Our Own Eyes. According to Mike, Truth at Last is the most focused, strident, and compelling case for Earhart and Noonan's Marshall Islands landing, followed by their deaths on Saipan, ever written. In addition to bringing together all the significant eyewitness and other witness accounts gathered by a multitude of investigators for the first time, Truth at Last presents many new findings, testimony, and analysis, as well as never before published information from the late Fred Gorner's forgotten files that reveals the ongoing institutionalized cover-up of the truth about Amelia's fate at the highest levels of the U.S. government. Amelia Earhart, The Truth at Last, completely debunked both the esoteric 78-year-old Navy Coast Guard verdicts that Amelia Earhart's Electra, registration number NR 16020, crashed and sank in the Central Pacific off Howland Island on July 2nd in 1937, as well as currently fashionable falsehood that flyers landed on Nuku'arumoro, I'll have Mike pronounce that one, Nuku'arumoro, in the Phoenix Islands, where they perished from starvation. He lives in North Jacksonville, Florida, with his wife, Nee, and their cats. And he's such a great gentleman. And again, his work is so detailed, and we're going to get into that tonight and talk about some new stuff he has coming up. So without any further delay, Mike, good evening. Welcome to K-Talk, my friend, and the Fringe Radio Show.
Good evening, Pat. Thanks for the nice introduction, and it's good to be back with you. 66 degrees in Salt Lake. That's pretty nice for early March, isn't it?
Oh man, I'll tell you, we had a vicious winter here, Mike, and last winter it was in the 60s in January, and we paid for it in spades this time. It was crazy, but we're finally seeing a break, and a beautiful day today, gorgeous day.
I guess there's still snow up there in the Wasatch, though.
Oh, there is
for the skiers.
Yeah. I think there's
one day of 66, not enough to melt it all, right?
Yeah. I think about 140 inches of base at most of the resorts. So we needed the water terribly. We've been in a drought situation for a long time. Well, hey, we're in the middle of the desert, but yeah, we got a lot of snow and tons of snow and a lot more rain to come. So I think we're going to fill Lake Powell up a little bit and fill the reservoirs and be safe. But it's been a while since I've talked to you, and I first of all, I appreciate all the stuff that you email to me. This whole story, I know you've got a new book coming out, some things coming out. I would like to get into that, and of course, for listeners that didn't hear the interview last time, I'd like to kind of get into Amelia Earhart a little bit, and the story just needs to be retold of this famous aviator and all the garbage that surrounds everything here, and you've cut right through it.
Thank you. Yes, Pat. There's so much to get to, with your listeners. The ones that haven't, that didn't listen to the first one, the first time I was here, I was with you about a year ago, I think, and we had a good discussion. And I've done this several times, different places, and stand-ups, and I go and visit groups sometimes, and I never know what I'm going to do really from start to finish. But the first thing that your listeners really need to know, the ones that were here last time and the new listeners, what they need to know first of all is they can throw out just about everything that they've heard about the Earhart disappearance on the media, in the newspapers or the radio, unless they listen to me or I don't know who else. the common fare is, the Navy verdict, or ever since 1989 it's been Nicaraguaro. That's how you say that. That's in the Phoenix Islands. That's the latest trend in the last 30 years. These are disinformation gambits. These are phony theories that are used by the establishment to throw people off the scent. The thing is it's not the truth in the Earhart disappearance, Pat, is not a mystery. First of all, this idea that it's a mystery is a lie. It's an abject lie. And it's really hard for people to get their arms around that idea, because for 77 years, this country and everybody in it has been told by the establishment and the media that it is a mystery, that it's an unsolvable mystery. We can't ever figure out what happened. She crashed and sank, no trace of her, or this or that. It's a real myth. It's become part of the cultural furniture that it's a mystery. But it's not a mystery. The government knows very well what happened to Amelia and Fred Noonan in July 1937. They know very well what happened to them, and that's why they don't want us to know. But it's not a secret. I'm not the first one to announce this. This is old news to anybody that's any kind of a student of the Earhart case. They already know what happened to Amelia Earhart. She crashed at Millie Atoll in the lagoon there. I mean, I'm just going to lay it all down from the start.
Go ahead.
And then we'll just pick it apart as we go, because there's no point in being cute about this, because this is well known to anyone that can read. In 1966, let's start with 1960, Paul Briand Jr.'s book. That started the modern-day search for Amelia Earhart. 1960, the name of the book was Daughter of the Sky. It started out as a garden variety biography of Amelia Earhart. Now, if you go to Amazon.com right now and you punch in the name Amelia Earhart, take a guess how many results you'll get on Amazon, the world's biggest bookseller.
Probably a lot.
2,700 plus results on Amelia Earhart, okay? Now, of those 2,700, almost 2,700 of them are either biographies, novels, or fanciful nonsense. Out of all those books, there's only about 6 books that have ever been written that present any part or piece of the truth about what happened to her. Okay? But those books are available, and they've been available, starting with Paul Briand's book in 1960. In that book, in the last chapter of that book, Paul Briand was a English teacher at the Air Force Academy in Colorado, not too far from you guys, Colorado Springs, right? And he was given information by a former Navy dentist named Casimir Sheft, and this dentist had served on Saipan in the late 40s, and this dentist, Casimir Sheft, was told by Josephine Blanco Akiyama, who was his dental assistant. She was like 16 or 17 years old at the time. She told him about seeing the plane landing in Tanapag Harbor in 1937 July. She saw the silver plane, and she saw the woman get out, and she saw the man on shore and come see the American. I'm not going to read from Briand's book. I know your listeners, they don't want to be read to. Basically, Briand reported Josephine Blanco Akiyama's eyewitness sighting of Amelia Earhart at Saipan in July 1937. This was secondhand, coming from Casimir Sheft. Briand put it in his book, and that immediately caused a sensation on the West Coast, especially among news people, the foremost being Linwood Day of the San Mateo Times. He saw this and heard about this in Briand's book. He went and interviewed Josephine Blanco Akiyama, who lived in San Mateo. She had moved from Saipan to San Mateo she had moved in the mid-50s. And he interviewed her. She told him about what she saw on Saipan. He wrote these stories up in the San Mateo Times. That was the first, these stories, one of the headlines was, San Mateo says Earhart executed by Japanese on Saipan. Well, That's pretty big. That's pretty hot stuff for 1960. Of course, the only people that knew about it were the people in San Mateo, because the rest of the country was being shut out of this story. It was being blacked out already by most of the news sources in the country, especially the major papers. Okay, even at that early date. A guy named Fred Gerner at the time, he was a San Francisco KCBS newsman, well-known figure in San Francisco. He saw Linwood Day stories. He went and talked to Josephine. He believed Josephine's story. He went to Saipan immediately in June of 1960, his first of 4 investigations on Saipan. He found 13 native witnesses who all corroborated her story. Now, this is the important thing about all this. Nobody, including Josephine, was really supposed to know about this. When the plane, we think it was a seaplane that landed at Tanapag Harbor on Saipan, the whole area of the base there was Japanese. It was Japanese controlled, and it was a Navy seaplane, a Japanese seaplane base, and it was off limits to native personnel. Nobody was really supposed to know about this, but Josephine was there because she was bringing her brother-in-law lunch, and she had a special pass to get on. What I'm getting to is there were very few eyewitnesses to her actual landing there, okay? In what we think was a seaplane.
Interesting.
Gerner interviewed 200 people, and he made sure they interviewed them. These were native Saipanese, and these people did not speak English. They spoke Spanish, okay? And the Gerner made sure that he had the assistance of 3 of the 3 missionary Catholic priests on the island to translate the natives' stories to him so that he would get the truth. He was very vehement about this because this is one of the big criticisms of Fred Gerner's findings on Saipan and his witness testimony. This is what broke it open in the Earhart case, his findings on Saipan. He wanted to make sure that he would not be criticized, okay, or people would misconstrue what he did. The biggest criticism, even now, people that we talk about, the cynics and the skeptics and the outright propagandists, they say, well, Gerner put words in their mouth. Gerner led the witnesses. Gerner did this. Gerner did that. No, not true whatsoever. Those are all lies as well. And we talk about that at length in my book, okay? And we use specific examples about how Gerner was absolutely meticulous in his interviews of these witnesses.
Interesting.
So we have that to start with, and this led to the 1960 headlines in the San Mateo Times, the July 1st, 1960 headlines, Amelia Earhart, mystery is solved. 100-point headlines. That was the headline on the front page, and then the story was famed aviatrix died on Saipan. Okay, and then they got into the details about how she well, I could read just a section of it unless you have to go to.
No, go ahead.
Okay, well, this is July 1st, 1960, the San Mateo Times. The mystery of the fate of Amelia Earhart was solved today. 23 years to the day that she vanished with her navigator over the lonely Pacific. Amelia Earhart and her navigator, Fred Noonan, crash-landed in the Garapan Harbor near the Tanapag Naval Base on Saipan in 1937. A Japanese naval launch picked up the 2 flyers and brought them to shore. They were taken to the military headquarters, questioned, and separated. Noonan was forced into an automobile by his captors and was never seen again. Amelia was moved to a small building at the military barracks compound. That's the top of the story, 1960. Now, this story, obviously, should have created a sensation, and it did in certain quarters, but not in the major papers. They were already under orders not to run this story, okay? Because the establishment of the government did not want the American people to know the truth about what happened to Earhart. We'll get to that, to why, the big why of that. But as I said from the top, this is not news, okay? The thing is that Gerner's book in 1966 was The title was The Search for Amelia Earhart. And in 1966, I don't know what you were doing. I was playing football in high school, and I could care less about Amelia Earhart. I didn't have a clue. And neither did the Washington Post run the story. So I didn't know what was going on, okay? And Gerner's book sold 400,000 copies. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for several months in 1966. But shortly after his book came out, Time magazine came out and just ran a scathing review of Gerner's book, telling everybody, go away, nothing to see here. This book barely hangs together. Gerner doesn't know what he's talking about, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was just a real hit piece on the book. Now, ever since then, in the mainstream media in this country, Saipan and Amelia Earhart have been verboten. You rarely ever see it. You rarely see mention of that, and when you do, it's always with the big C, denoting the conspiracy theorists, the real nut jobs, the real fringe people. They're the ones that believe that she was on Saipan and she was picked up by the Japanese. It's called the Japanese capture theory, and it's known, and it's in the mainstream. It's like, you really got to be nuts to believe this, okay? That's absolute nonsense. There is no competing theory at all to this. Anyone that looks closely at the other so-called theories will see they just evaporate into smoke. There's nothing at all to support them, absolutely nothing. Whereas we have thousands of threads to support her Marshall's Landing and her Saipan captivity, Pat. I mean, it's just if there was nothing to the Saipan theory, we wouldn't have hundreds of witnesses, we wouldn't have thousands of threads, we wouldn't have everything that we have. I mean, there wouldn't have happened if she went to drink, as they say. Right. It's simple common sense. I know you have to break soon, don't you?
No, we got another 10 minutes.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, well, let's so I don't know where to go next. I think what I'd like to at least tell your listeners is that, and then we'll go back to the beginning. But for the last year, you read an introduction about the book, at the top of the show. In the last year, we have been working on a second edition of The Truth at Last, okay? And just yesterday, Sunbury Press sent it to press, and they announced it on their website. It's not up on Amazon yet, but it should be up on Amazon either later tonight or tomorrow, or I think Monday at the latest. The second edition of Truth at Last will be available. The first edition will be put to bed, and the second edition is just so much superior. I did so much more work to make this book so much better. That we add 2 chapters, 2 really important chapters on her biography and the search and the radio signals, the post-lost radio signals that were claimed to have been picked up by several agencies and individuals after she went missing. So we have these 2 chapters to begin the book that makes it all very comprehensive. It introduces the reader to the whole story rather than jumping into it as we did in the first book. Okay, and we also have many new photos, some of which are from Gerner's book. His son contacted me a few years ago, Lance Gerner, and he gave me permission to use some of these photos from his father's first book, just really rare photos, never seen, because nobody reads his book anymore. I mean, only Earhart buffs really know about this. Everybody else is they just see what they see in the media, and what they see is complete misdirection and disinformation.
Yeah, they just take it. They just eat it up. They listen to whatever the media has to say and they don't challenge.
And it's become what I do with my life. I retired in 2008 from regular work, and this is what I do now. And nobody else does this. I mean, nobody else does. This is another point that people have to understand. This story, the truth about what happened to her, it is so unique. There's no other story like it. No since Gerner, no major journalist, no journalist of any kind, has tried to tell this story or has even bothered to investigate the story because they've been told not to and they've been warned off. They know what a sacred cow this story is in Washington and in the establishment media. That's why it's left to people like me, obscure nobodies, who happened to run into Thomas Devine at the right time in my life in 1988. Thomas Devine wrote a book in 1988. I was in the Navy, or working for the Navy. I just got out of the Navy. I was working for the Navy as a writer, as a civilian in Arlington, Virginia. It was a Navy agency called the Navy Internal Relations Activity. And we put out feature articles for the Navy and Marine Corps around the world, ships and shore stations, the whole deal. And I was just assigned to do an overview on the Earhart story. And I went and I read the books. I didn't read all of them, but I read some of them, and I was immediately transfixed. And I contacted Devine, who had just written a book in 1987 called Eyewitness, the Amelia Earhart Incident. This book was all about Devine's own experience on Saipan in 1944, when he was a sergeant in the 244th Army Postal Unit, came ashore on Saipan. And when he came ashore on Saipan, he immediately took his commanding officer to Eslido Airfield, which is where he found some officers outside an administration-type building there arguing about who would get credit for discovering the Earhart airplane. It was in a hangar next door, and Devine was just flabbergasted when he heard all this, and he asked somebody if it was true. He asked a Marine, and the Marine said, yes, but don't tell anybody. I said so. The area was immediately placed off limits. Later that day, Devine saw the plane in the air, NR 16020, Earhart's plane. He saw it land at Eslido Field. And then later that night, he heard an explosion. He went to the field. After he had been to I'm getting ahead of myself. During the day, after the plane had landed, he snuck over there and he saw the plane in person. And then later on, the plane was destroyed. He saw it go up in fire. It was doused with gasoline. He heard an explosion and he saw it in flames. We have many witnesses to all of the things that I'm telling you. Everything that we're going to discuss.
So they actually after. They actually, not Earhart, but somebody actually flew the airplane then.
Yes. Yes, somebody flew the airplane and landed the airplane. Devine saw the airplane land and a tire went flat. He made a note of that in his book. Now, at the end of it, he took this home. Well, before Devine got home in 1945, he was a part of the garrison force that was left on Saipan, and he was there for a year. And during that time, he was shown a gravesite by an Okinawan woman who said it was a grave of a white man and woman who had come from the sky. Well, immediately he thought the woman was out of her mind. And then after he put it together, and after he realized that he had seen Earhart's plane, he started to think maybe this is their gravesite. Then after that, while he was getting ready to go back to the States, he was ordered to go aboard an airplane by what appeared to be an officer, but he didn't have insignia. This was a guy in khaki, Navy khaki. He was an ONI agent, as was obvious later on. He was ordered by an ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence agent, to get aboard this airplane, and Devine was too smart to do that, and he refused to do it, and the guy said, you have to go. You know about Amelia Earhart. They're waiting for you in Hawaii. As soon as Devine heard that, he denied that he knew anything about Earhart, and he didn't get on the plane, and he thinks that if he would have, he never would have arrived alive. This is part of the Devine story. It's just compelling. So he went back home with this, carrying this around, trying to find out what was going on, and he read nothing about it in the papers. There was never anything revealed about this. And so he wrote, jump ahead, 1945, 1987, it took him, 42 years to write this book. It was finally published in 1987. And next to Gerner's book, Devine's book is probably number one or two after Gerner's book. There's another book by Vincent V. Loomis who was another military-type individual. He was in the Air Force.
Wow.
And he wrote a book in 1985 called Amelia Earhart, The Final Story, which covers mainly the Marshall Islands aspect of the Earhart disappearance and her landing and the witnesses that he interviewed in the late 70s and early 80s. Vincent V. Loomis did this. Okay, so we have Loomis's book in 1985, and just before Loomis's book, there's a book by Oliver Knaggs, who was a South African who started out as a cameraman and who accompanied Loomis on one of his 4 trips to the Marshalls. Knaggs got so interested in all this that he wrote his own book that came out 3 years before Loomis's did. Knaggs' book is just a collector's item. Nobody really knows about it at all. Loomis's book was actually published by Random House, a mainstream publisher, and that book got. The book is very poorly written, and because Loomis was not a writer, he wasn't a journalist at all, and he had very little help. But I mean, what he put there and the results of his research were astounding. And he found things through his research, like he found in Tokyo files that the Japanese had lied about their search in the Marshalls, in the Marshalls, and what they said they had done in 1937, they hadn't done at all. It was all a lie, because they already had her. They were just pretending. And all of this has been exposed. It's all been exposed to anybody that wants to read about it. But nowadays, I mean, very few people read anyway, and they certainly don't, unless they're real, unless they're history buffs or something. They go in and they can find all these things, just like they can find my book.
Sure.
And what my book did in 2012 is we took all the research that's been done ever since Devine's book and since my book in 2002 with the 26 GIs who came forward in answer to Devine at the end of his book. He asked for help, and 26 GIs who were on Saipan all came forward to corroborate his story. So that became With Our Own Eyes in 2002.
Amazing.
All this is available to the enterprising student, to the curious observer, but none of it is. No one's going to be directed to any of it by our media. Our media is they are just worthless. They are so corrupt. They refuse to even mention Saipan anymore, with rare exception. I mean, oh man, I mean, it's just too much to live with this day in and day out. I mean, it's just,
I know, craziness. I know. I agree. And of course, and one thing I'd like to talk a little bit about, and we did talk about that the last time we had John, Mike, was about some of these hocus pocus expeditions that some people put together to do nothing more than profit.
We should get to that next, I think.
Okay. All right, everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio. Our guest tonight is Mike Campbell. His website is www.earharttruth.wordpress.com. His book is...
You can make that just earharttruth.com.
Okay, you can remove the WordPress. And then his book, Amelia Earhart, The Truth at Last, of
That's
course.
That's Earhart Truth with 2 T's.
With 2 T's.
And no period.
Gotcha. Very interesting.
And we do a lot of work on this blog. I really try to get out something significant every few weeks. It's not just a couple lines that we dash off, or it's not just a chat room. I think there's 80-some pieces that I've done since 2012 when the book first came out, somewhere as long as 5,000 words. Anybody that wants to get smart about the Earhart matter, please come and just take a look. Yep. Take a look at what we have to offer here. There's nowhere else on the net that you can go that even comes close to what we offer here on this on my blog.
Oh, I know. I've gone through it many times and looked through all the information. It's amazing. There is so much there, and again, there's so many books, so many theories, like you said. Some with some with some substance, others that are just quite fictional, and some that I've come across that are just complete nonsense.
Well, we just had, I just did a 4-part series on the Irene Bolam myth. The this was something that was very close to a friend to the Amelia Earhart Society, to Bill Primack, who was one of the foremost Earhart researchers. This happened. The Irene Bolam as Amelia Earhart myth began in 1965 when a Earhart researcher named Joe Gervais, Gervais, saw a woman at the Sea Spray Inn in New Jersey and thought that it was Amelia Earhart. Believe it or not, I mean, it just boggles the mind. He was absolutely convinced that this was Amelia Earhart returned in 1965, and they actually wrote a book about this called Amelia Earhart Lives, and this became a cultish thing, where there were actually people that really believed this, and they were followers. Well, Irene Bolam immediately sued McGraw-Hill, the publisher of the book. In 1970, the book came out. Joe Kloss, the author, just recently died at the age of 95, and Irene Bolam sued them for defamation, and they settled. They pulled the book off the shelves. And the word was that they didn't release publicly the amount, but the word was that she made probably around $500,000. That's a lot of money in 1970, and for this, I mean, this is just outrageous. And this kind of stuff is what really has fueled the idea that the Earhart thing, or the Earhart studying the Earhart matter, or studying the so-called mystery, is only for fringe people. No pun intended.
No, not take it.
This is what started it. This kind of stuff. I mean, and then and Fred Gerner, you know, I mean, he was right on in the middle of all this, and I mean, he was just aghast by this, and this became very big among certain people, and there are people that still believe this. In 2006. The National Geographic produced a Earhart special. To their credit, they did depict the Saipan situation with Devine and another witness that we should talk about, Robert Wallach. They depicted the Marshall Islands as well. But they also had a section on the Irene Bolam thing. And they had forensic experts come on there and just completely blow it away and show that Irene Bolam, there's no way this person was Amelia Earhart. There was no possible physical way that they were the same person. The actual physical characteristics were measured by forensic experts to show that this Irene Bolam was a discrete individual, and with a separate birth certificate, with a separate history and everything else. But I mean, this Bolam thing, I mean, how can you describe it? It just turned everybody off to the idea that would ever have an answer to the Earhart problem. It just made it all seem so ridiculous. Whereas even Joe Gervais, whose work was featured in the book Amelia Earhart Lives, in the first couple of chapters, he did some of his best work was highlighted when he went to Guam and he went to Saipan and he interviewed new eyewitnesses. The ones on Guam had lived on Saipan in 1937, and some of them had seen her, had seen Amelia on Saipan in 1937, or knew of her, and then they went to Saipan on right after Gerner went there, and they interviewed other eyewitnesses and solidified Gerner's findings. But then at the end of the book, they turned around and said, well, she came back from Saipan and she became Irene Bolam. So all of the good stuff in that book was just swept aside with the nonsense because of the lawsuit and because it was so stupid.
Right.
I mean, so Joe Kloss, as I said, he just passed away at the age of 95. Now, he's the one that wrote this book. He believed everything that Gervais told him. But Kloss did a lot of other things in his life too. I don't want to just leave your listeners with this idea that he was a complete crank. He was a World War II hero. He flew Spitfires for the Germans. For the British before the war, before we entered the war. After we entered the war, he came back here. He flew for the Army Air Force. He was captured in Europe. He was captured by the Germans, and he got involved with the Long March. This march over there in 1945, where thousands of Americans and Allied prisoners froze to death during this 80-mile march across Germany. Incredible stuff that you never hear about. And he wrote a book called Maybe I'm Dead about that. Like the prologue to Stalag 17, the famous novel. He wrote 9 other books too, Klaus did. So, Joe, I'm not just completely bad-mouthing him.
No.
For his involvement with Amelia Hart Lives, but that's what he'll always be remembered for more than anything, Yeah. So I think that's enough of Amelia Hart Lives.
Sure. Can we? I'll tell you at this point, if I could ask Mike, just for again people that are tuning in, we're talking about the Earhart story. Can you give just a little synopsis, if we could, before we move on?
Sure. What do you want me to say?
Well,
you want to start from the very beginning?
Well, I mean, I think most people know, about her fame and who she was, and maybe we could talk a little bit about that. But of course, the final flight. Can we kind of talk about that? And with the research that you've done, and again, the book and the testimony, maybe kind of give a little step through of what happened and how it all kind of ended.
Well, yeah, the final flight, it's was just a disaster. She started, Amelia Earhart, people have to remember, in the 1930s, it was a completely different world than we live in today. There was only very little media, a little bit of radio news, and everything else was newspapers.
Right.
And Amelia Earhart, from 1930 to 1935, held 8 long-distance aviation records. She flew from Honolulu to California to Oakland. She flew from Los Angeles to Mexico City. She was the first person to fly solo to do that. She was the first person to fly solo from Mexico City to Newark. She was the first woman to fly the Atlantic in 1928. She wasn't the pilot. She was just a passenger in that flight. But in 1932, that's when Amelia Hart became huge. That's when she became the second person to solo the Atlantic. Charles Lindbergh, the famous Charles Lindbergh, being the first. And in 1932, Amelia, it was about a 2,000-mile flight. She wanted to land in Paris. She landed she encountered all kind of problems during that flight. Equipment problems. Her manifold was on fire. Ice storms, wind. To read the accounts of her flight in May of 1932, where she landed she took off from Harbor Grace in Newfoundland and landed in a cow pasture in Ireland. And because she couldn't go on anymore, but it counted because she made it to Europe, and that was a solo flight. It was almost 15 hours, and she with that she became huge. They took her to London, the Queen had her in, and then she went to France. They gave her the Legion of Honor medal, and then she came back, and she was she went to Congress. They gave her the Distinguished Flying Medal, or the Distinguished Flying Cross. One thing after the other. There were other female flyers that were famous too. Besides, she wasn't the only one. But Jackie Cochran comes to mind. She was the Air Force person that went to Tokyo and actually saw Earhart files in 1945. She was a famous flyer in the 30s. There was others, but I'd just like to read you something.
Sure, go ahead. Take your time.
When Amelia got this is the United Press. It was called United Press in those days. This is from Londonderry, Ireland, May 21st. Her first words to the press after she landed there. There's no way that you can make this up or duplicate this. She says, I mean, this is a woman that almost died, okay, crossing the Atlantic in a plane that you wouldn't even get in. I wouldn't get in with a shotgun next to my head, okay? A single propeller Vega. It looks real nice in the Smithsonian and everything, but and it was state of the art in 1932, okay? But you think about the courage that it took for somebody to get into this plane and fly over the Atlantic with no radio whatsoever. There was no radio help at all going on then. She did this without radio. She says, this is how she's quoted by United Press in 1932, okay? Amelia says, "I am very, very happy to have completed the flight this far, but I am sorry I did not reach Paris. 4 hours after I left Newfoundland, I saw flames shooting from the exhaust pipe. I became uneasy." Yeah, I think I'd become a little bit uneasy myself, too. I mean, really. Okay, here's her next quote. "It would have taken 4 hours to return. However, so I thought it would be safer to go ahead. The next trouble was a leak in the gasoline tank. I was worried all the time as to whether the fuel would last out the trip." And then she says, "To add to my troubles, the heavy weather encountered in the storm curtailed my speed." I mean, you talk about understatement. I mean, this woman had ice water for veins. There's absolutely no question. This woman is one of the bravest people that ever walked the earth. There's no question at all.
Without a doubt.
And this is why I've learned to love her. I mean, I'll just say it right out front. This woman is worthy of veneration, okay? I'm not talking adoration, but I'm talking veneration. She's worthy to be venerated in the world, in the pantheon of American aviation history. And what's happened is that her legacy and that of Fred Noonan has been just torn to shreds because of the establishment's refusal to admit what happened to them on Saipan, that they were picked up by the Japanese and taken to Saipan. Now, you talked about the last flight, and how all this happened. Everything was going pretty well.
Well, you know what? If we could, Mike, we've got about 3 minutes before a news break.
Yeah.
I'd like to really talk a little more in depth about the last flight, but you did bring, if that's okay with you.
Sure,
one thing you brought up about, like you said, you liked her personality. Now, let me ask you this. In all honesty, do you think that the movie Amelia kind of reflected her personality, and that was more of a, of that time frame in the 30s? She was kind of like a tomboy. I mean, she was everything that I've read and looked into, she was a little bit of a rebel back then. I mean, she definitely set herself apart from, the woman that just cleaned clothes, raised the kids, and cooked dinner for the husband. I mean, she was a rebel almost.
Well, she was very much of an individual. She was like an original feminist. I mean, she was married to George Putnam, who was a famous publisher who had money, but she still got in those airplanes and flew those airplanes by herself. Nobody else got in there with her. And you can't do these things without help. Nobody can operate in a vacuum, And so, yeah, sure, she had help, and absolutely she was an individual. And some guys, some men even reported that she had a bit of a mouth on her, and she could be a little bit nasty at times when she wanted to be. Well, there's nothing new about that. I mean, to look around today, I would bet you that her mouth was a lot cleaner than most of the things you see on evening TV.
Oh, I would agree. But in its time was pretty risque.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say risque, because that sort of image of her was kept very much out of the limelight, and I'm not sure how accurate all of it is. I mean, I've never really heard the word risque associated with Amelia Earhart by anybody with any credibility.
Gotcha.
Let's say.
Gotcha.
She was one of a kind. There's no question about it.
Without a doubt. Mike, we've got to take an NBC News break. Our guest tonight is Mike Campbell. His website is earharttruth.com with 2 T's. His book is Amelia Earhart, The Truth at Last.
The second edition is coming out.
Where can our listeners, once that comes out, where can we get the book?
Just go to my website or go to Amazon.com, either one. I'll have plenty of links they can click on, or they can go to Amazon.
Well, and all I can say is go check out Mike's website. You'll see his credibility, the work, the time, the effort that's put into it. Yeah, we're talking about a lot of details, and yet we're just scratching the surface because there's so much to this, and people need to know the truth about this great lady, this great aviator. Our guest right now, which it's such an honor to have back on, is Mike Campbell. His website is called EarhartTruth.com. His book is called Amelia Earhart, The Truth at Last. The second edition will be released any day. Mike, again, it's an honor to have you here, my friend. Thank you for taking the time. And anybody who has interest in this subject needs to check out the website because it's like an encyclopedia. It has so much detail and hones in on things. And again, I want to thank you for staying up late and being here with us tonight.
No problem, Pat. My pleasure. This is what I like to do. This is what I live for. It's a very lonely job because most people don't really care about this at all. Believe me.
and it's a shame too because again, this is an aviator that made history, that changed history, and why people wouldn't want to find out the truth or know the truth. But if we can back up a little bit, right before the break, we talked about Amelia, and then and if you could, you said you'd walk us through somewhat of a timeline of the incident, if that would be okay.
Okay, well, this is all just a rough description of all of it because there's just so much detail involved in the last flight, and the last flight is something that anybody can go and find in just about any biography or anything else. These are official records that anybody can find, and there's nothing specific, that's controversial really about the last flight because the logs have been released, and we know what happened as far as the messages that were received by the Itasca and the messages that weren't received by Amelia. The problem is that no one except a few of us know or are willing to go and interpret this information the proper way and to ask the questions, why did she behave so strangely during the last flight? Now, the last flight was from New Guinea, New Guinea, to Howland Island, July 2nd, 1937. It was the key piece of her round-the-world flight. That was her swan song. She said that after she completed the round-the-world flight and set the record for circumnavigation of the world at 27,000 miles, destroying the previous record of Wiley Post of 15,000 miles. And the key piece of that flight was New Guinea to Howland Island in the middle of the Pacific, the Central Pacific, 2,556 miles of open ocean. Had never been done before. They had FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, had ordered an airstrip, rough airstrip to be produced on Howland. Now, there was a reason for this because because he knew the war was coming, and so they used a civilian pretense to make an airstrip on Howland Island they thought they might need during the Second World War. But Amelia Earhart was supposed to go and land on Howland after 2,500 miles. She had approximately 4,000 miles worth of fuel, 1,100 gallons. She took off July 2nd, 10 a.m. from New Guinea, and she had Fred Noonan with her as her navigator, who was perhaps the best in the world, the best navigator in the world, the most capable of doing what needed to be done, finding this island, this speck in the middle of the Pacific. It had never been done, but they did have the technology, as rough as it was, as primitive as it was. They should have been able to locate the island. But nothing that she did during her flight indicated that she wanted to find that island. Nothing. She was only on the air between 8 and 9 seconds at a time, or 8 and 10 seconds at a time, never long enough for the Itasca to get a fix on her. The radio communications were an absolute disaster from start to finish. The Itasca was the Coast Guard cutter that was waiting off of Howland Island, ostensibly to talk her in to help her find the island. but the radio communications were just completely misunderstood from the start. They were never on the same page, and they never, apparently, she never established two-way communications with the Itasca. And she left her trailing antenna. She had left her 500 kilohertz trailing antenna. Some say Miami. Fred Gerner says she left it in Burbank before they started their second flight, because the first flight was she had to crash at Luke Field in Hawaii. They had to take the Electra back and redo it and repair it in Burbank, and then finally she was ready to leave in June of 37. The trailing antenna, the 500 kilohertz, gave her the ability to transmit over long distances. Well, she left that somewhere. She didn't have it with her. First of all, that made no sense at all either. She said, well, it's a little bit too heavy and we don't really need it. Nonsense. There's never been a good explanation for the reason why she left it. And so there's never also been a good explanation for why she was never on the air long enough to be picked up by anybody. And so the details are very confusing, even to me after all these years. She said she was going to be broadcasting on 6210 kilocycles or 3105 kilocycles. Meanwhile, the Itasca was broadcasting at 500 kilocycles, and so it was like a circus of errors. And the whole thing is really frustrating to even read about. Anyway, she was on track to Howland after 8 hours of the final flight. She was heard at Nauru Island. She was heard there by an official who had a ham radio. They didn't communicate because they didn't have the ability to do that, but he did hear her transmitting. And so we think that she was on track at that time, 8 hours into the flight, which would have been a third of the way. After that, or just around that time or before that, she signed off with Ley, New Guinea. She signed off with that radio operator, Harry Balfour. She said, "I'm going ahead. I'm going to try to. I don't want to talk to you anymore because I'm going ahead now, and I need to try to talk to the Itasca." Well, she never maintained, was able to hook up with the Itasca, and so, but they did hear her messages. They heard several of her messages, and as she approached the island, ostensibly approached the island, her signal became stronger. So they thought that she was in the vicinity. And her last message was at 8:44 Howland time. She was 20 hours and 14 minutes into the flight at that point. The estimate of the flight was about 18 to 19 hours. She was already overdue. And her last message, this is the official last message, she says, "We are on the line of position 157-337. We'll repeat this message. We will repeat this message on 6210 kilocycles. Wait listening on 6210 kilocycles. We are running north and south." That was her last official message ever heard. That message was so strong that the chief radio operator on the Itasca, the chief radio man, Leo Bellerts, said that he ran up on the deck and he was looking for the airplane. He thought he saw the Electra. He expected to see her Electra in the vicinity. No such luck, okay? So after that, there was nothing, absolutely nothing officially. We don't know how close she really was. This is the thing, because we know where she wound up later on that morning. She wound up at Mille Atoll. We have witnesses that saw her at Mille Atoll. She landed in the lagoon at Mille Atoll, which is about 830 miles northwest of Howland Island. Okay. Now, this is where the plot thickens, and this is where fact and fiction separate. We have the government version. They sent the Colorado, the battleship, immediately, and right after the Colorado came the Lexington, the aircraft carrier. They searched 262,000 square miles of ocean. I mean, they looked everywhere, but they didn't look in the Marshall Islands because they weren't allowed in the Marshall Islands. Japan owned the Marshall Islands. They said, no, you can't come here. We'll take care of that. We'll look for her, okay? They lied about everything that they did during the search. Everything was a lie, and they got her very quickly after she landed at Millie Atoll near Barr Island, Barre Island. There's three little islands up there called the Endrikins. She landed in the lagoon, on the lagoon side, from what we understand, and even recent research has found artifacts in that area. And those artifacts do match. They're not excluded from coming off an Electra. However, these are not smoking gun proof either, because there's no serial numbers, you see, and the media will never ever accept anything except if it's absolute. And I understand that. The thing is, research has shown us that no other planes were in that area. No other planes had crashed in that area at all within 10 miles of Millie during the whole war or pre-war years. So it couldn't have been off of any other plane except the Electra. This is new stuff. This very exciting research that's been done. Now, if it was somebody else doing it and it was proving that she was on Nicomararo, then it would be all over the newspapers. It would be everywhere. It would be on TV, and they would all say the mystery was solved, because that's what they want. That's what they want. They want a false conclusion, you see.
Gotcha. So the Japanese captured her when she crashed in the lagoon.
Yes, they knew where she was. They had the. Apparently, it's possible they could have tracked her with their radio. Their radio capabilities were superior to ours in those times, and they did own the marshals, and they were close. And it's very possible that they had even eyewitness. Well, we have eyewitness natives that later on told investigators that they saw the white man and the white woman get out of the airplane. One of the witnesses said they got into a yellow boat which grew. Now, what is a yellow boat which grows?
A submarine.
No. I'll give you another try. Think of it, a yellow boat which grows. This is how an unsophisticated Marshallese native described what these two people got into.
Go ahead, tell me, Mike.
It's a life raft, an inflatable life raft.
All right, it's been a long 4 hours. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'll let you slide on that. It was obviously an inflatable life raft, and we know that she carried a yellow life raft in all these previous trips in her inventory, no question at all. And then just recently, this fishing boat pickup, which was a very strong, let's say, rumor in the 1980s. Fred Gerner looked into it, and he was told that a Japanese newspaper ran a story about the American flyers being picked up by a Japanese fishing boat. Okay, and he looked into that. He could never find the original Japanese newspaper story. However, it did exist, and recently a Earhart researcher sent me a copy, and it's on my blog for anybody who wants to see it. They can see a copy of the story that ran on July 13th, 1937, in the Bethlehem, Pennsylvania Globe-Times. Just a little bohunk, country newspaper, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, ran the story, and let's see, what was the? I'm trying to. I don't have the headline. I have the body of the story, but I do have the headline right here on my wall, because I have this on my wall. It says, "Tokyo hears Jap fishing boat picked up Amelia." That's the headline of the story, and then underneath it says, "Vague and unconfirmed rumors that Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan have been rescued by a Japanese fishing boat without a radio and therefore unable to make any report found no verification here today, but plunged Tokyo into a fever of excitement. The Navy Department had no official word of any such rescue, but were striving to ascertain the position of the fishing boat rumored to have affected the rescue. Tokyo newspapers had a virtual field day. Stories speculating about the rumors were given a tremendous play, competing with developments in North China for the most prominent display." End of story. That story was never followed up. Okay, that was just a standalone. That nothing was ever done about that. Because Tokyo
In Tokyo, they retracted the story. They said it was phony, and the government scrambled to cover this up immediately, and they denied that the story was true. But this happened. This definitely happened. She was picked up by some sort of a Japanese vessel, and then she was taken to the Koshu at some point, the Japanese survey ship that picked up the Electra. They put the plane on the back of the Koshu. We have witnesses that told Bill Primack about that. The late Bill Primack, he actually interviewed one of the men who could have been asked to go to Bar Island and help to winch the Electra onto the Koshu. And from there, the Koshu eventually made its way to Saipan. And at Saipan, the Koshu was offloaded, and it had a broken wing, according to witnesses, and the Japanese repaired that broken wing. And then in 1944, Thomas Devine saw the plane in the air. As far as Amelia and Fred, they were taken from Mille to Jalawit. Okay, Jalawit was the Japanese headquarters in the Marshall Islands, and in Jalawit we have our most famous of the Marshall Island witnesses, Bilamon Amaron, who was called out to take care of Fred Noonan's knee injury, apparently. He also had a head injury, but he had a white bandage on his head. Another thing that's witnesses have in common from Saipan and the Marshalls, which are 1,500 miles apart, are that they said the white man had a white bandage on his head. And Bilamon Amaron was a Japanese-born 16-year-old hospital corpsman on Jalawit in 1937, and he told many researchers his experience and what happened. And I'm just going to read a little bit here. It's fascinating stuff. I mean, Bilamon Amaron's often told story was that during the summer of 1937, he was summoned to a Japanese naval tender ship to treat an American flyer's wounds. While there, Amaron treated an American man accompanied by a white female pilot for minor head and knee wounds. A silver airplane with a broken wing was attached to the stern of the ship. First published in Oliver Nagg's 1983 book, Amelia Earhart, Her Final Flight. But apparently, Bilamon was first interviewed by Gerner, we think in 1975. In 1989, Bilamon told Bill Primack that the crew called the lady Melia. I mean, that's a bit of a clue. He says, this is what he told Primack. In July 1937, I was residing on Jalawit, site of major Japanese naval base, working as a 16-year-old medical corpsman for Naval Hospital. One day at mid-morning, Japanese Navy tender ship comes to harbor, and the chief naval doctor takes me on board the ship. Crew and officers in naval uniforms. Sitting in deck chair was American woman, and sitting on hatch cover was thin American man with wounds. I'll jump ahead now. He says, Japanese officer then take me rear of Japanese ship and show me their airplane, silver, 2 motors with left wing broken. Airplane still in sling on back of ship. I know Japanese airplanes. This airplane was new to me, not Japanese. The airplane on the back of ship very shiny like silver. The Electra, was aluminum and shiny. Right. Propellers had only 2 blades. Crew called Lady Melia. She dressed in dark skirt, white blouse, and kerchief around neck. American man had blue eyes, thin mustache, skinny, both very tired, but in good health. Japanese officer tell me ship go to Saipan. This witness, Bilamon Amaron, became a very well-respected businessman in the Marshalls and died in his mid to late 60s in the mid-90s, I think, 1994 or so. And his story was told to me. He told his story to many people. And he was believed by everybody. Everybody believed him because he wasn't the only one that knew about this happening. He was just one of the most vocal and the most obvious witnesses because he was an eyewitness. He wasn't a secondhand witness. He was an eyewitness to all of it. Of course, he identified the photos, and it was her. It was her and Fred Noonan that were brought in to Jalawit.
Interesting.
And this is the kind of thing that we never, ever hear about. I mean, it's just, and anytime you do, it's like, well, American historians could not support the claims. They can find no support for the claims of the Marshalls or Saipan. I have learned to despise the American historical community, especially as concerns colleges and postgraduate type environments and these so-called paid professional historians. The last thing they are concerned about is talking about or finding the truth about the Earhart disappearance, because they don't want to lose their jobs.
Right.
Now, this has become such a sacred cow that's how bad it is. That's how bad it is. Let me tell you, I have been rejected and ignored by more than, I would say, 3,000 different, on at least 2,000 to 3,000 different occasions, whether it's media, newspapers, radio. I stopped a long time ago. I mean, I just had my stomach full of it.
Sure,
I mean, this is a sacred. There's no story like this. Okay, there is no other story like the Earhart story. Not even the JFK hit is anything like this. Because in the JFK hit, we have hundreds of books that show us that Oswald was framed. Absolutely, he was framed. Then that the Warren Commission was a setup, it was a whitewash, and it was all a lie. I don't want to get any further into it, but because some of the listeners might still believe that the Warren lie, that Oswald, his bullet went through,
right.
two different people. I mean, I know you've looked into this, and there's no way you buy the Warren Commission.
No, the magic bullet theory doesn't hold any water.
I mean, okay, so but the JFK has been pursued and it's been studied at length. The Earhart thing has not. It absolutely has not. And there's only been a few people. Before me, it was Devine did it in his book in 1987, and then after Devine's book, there was nothing until 2002 when With Our Own Eyes came out. Since 2002, there's been with Truth at Last, and 10 years later, in 2012, another good book by a writer named Dave Horner, an American researcher, an Earhart researcher, and a good book came out in 2013, I believe, called The Earhart Enigma. But it's not quite as focused as this book is on establishing the Saipan and Marshall Islands presence. That is the important aspect to all of this, because it just gives the lie to everything else that's out there. It just puts the lie. It shows that everything else out there is it's smoke, it's nonsense, it's misdirection, it's propaganda, and it's lies. Now, we don't have that much time left, but I don't know. Do you have any questions? Or
No. One thing I would like to hear, Mike, that and we got into that a little bit last time, but what about? I mean, once they were captured, what's the time frame? How long did they survive?
Okay.
If you could talk on that a little bit.
Well, we don't know precisely how long they lived because, first of all, the Saipanese didn't have calendars like we do normally think of. They weren't clocking them in, but we can pretty much estimate from all the different witness accounts. I mean, there's so many different witness accounts and secondhand witnesses. We even have one witness, claimed eyewitness, one alleged eyewitness on Saipan. That's a woman that said that she saw Amelia Earhart shot in 1944. Yeah, 1944, right before the invasion, and. But I don't believe that, okay? I mean, because of all the other evidence that we have weighs against the fact that Amelia might have lived 7 years there. Most of the witness evidence says that Fred Noonan was pretty shortly after the arrival. Now, they might not have arrived in July. They might have stayed in the Marshall Islands because we have all these different witnesses. All of this is in my book. All these different witnesses that say, like Mira Phillips said that she served Amelia Earhart her meals on Roy Namor in the Marshall Islands for a period of weeks. Before she left, she was taken from Roy Namor to Saipan. We don't know whether it was a land-based plane or a seaplane that landed at Tanapag Harbor. We still don't know that. Okay, we don't know whether it was a land-based plane that got in trouble and crashed in the harbor there, or a seaplane, because there's evidence that it could have been a land-based plane. That's that's a little mystery. That's a little mystery, and the biggest mystery that we have. The biggest mystery is how she landed and how and why she landed at Millie Atoll. Why did she miss Howland Island by 830 miles and land at Millie Atoll? That's the real mystery, okay? There's much evidence to suggest that she had been on some sort of a white intelligence mission. That's the only thing that explains her bizarre behavior throughout the whole last flight. And we have witnesses that say that she was on some sort of a white intelligence mission, possibly flying Jalowit, or not Jalowit, overflying Truk, which would have made her trip. Truk would have been north of Leh. She would have gone north, overflown Truk. She would have arrived there around 7 p.m. in July with enough light to see what was going on. And from there, she could have gone east and then landed at Millie Atoll. She could have run out of fuel. That's the whole trip from, if she would have overflown Truk, the whole trip would have been about 3,500 miles, which is really pushing it, and she could have ran out of fuel. We just don't know, okay? All these stories about she had there are claims that she had cameras installed. There's no evidence that she ever had any spy cameras, any cameras installed in her plane. That doesn't hold up. There are other evidence. There are other anecdotal stories that really suggest that she was on some sort of a mission. We have Margot DeCary. She was Earhart's personal secretary. She told several people, including Fred Gerner. She told them that it looked like, I'm quoting her, to me it looked like she was supposed to get lost on the theory that the Japanese would allow a peace mission to search for her. Then the United States could see if the Japanese were fortifying the Marshall Islands in violation of mutual agreements. So in this scenario that Margot DeCary puts forth, it wasn't a spy mission. It was just a mission to land in the Marshalls and then give our Navy a chance to go and look for her and see what was going on in the Marshalls. That is if that was their plan, that was really stupid. One of the most ill-conceived intelligence missions in the history of the world, because they never even got a chance to leave their berths, their docks, because the Japanese said, don't bother, don't come in here. Now, DeCary also told Joe Gervais that General Oscar Westhover and Bernard Baruch visited with Amelia at Marchfield in California between the flight that crashed on takeoff at Luke's Field and her second takeoff from Oakland in her real round-the-world flight attempt, that Bernard Baruch and Major General Oscar Westover, who was the Army Air Corps chief. Baruch was a good friend of FDR. Now, he said, the Kari said that these two met with her, and they had secret meetings, and nobody else was allowed. This information from DeCary was published in a 2003 book called Amelia Earhart Survived. This 2003 book I'm telling you about, it was an awful book. It tried to bring back the Bolam idea, and it was the book was really awful. But it did have this nugget in there. Margot DeCary telling Roland Reineck, the author, that these high-level guys met with Amelia Earhart at least twice at Fields, and that certainly suggests that something was up. Why would they go and see her?
All right, everybody, welcome back. Our guest tonight, Mike Campbell. Again, Mike, I can't thank you enough, my friend, for being here and sharing all this with you, and I'm letting you go through this stuff because, again, so many people talk and interrupt. I love hearing you talk, and your passion and everything that you put into this is amazing. My hat's off to you.
Thanks, Pat. I appreciate it. You're one of the scant few that can recognize the truth for what it is. I mean, you're one of the scant few that care, and I do appreciate it, my friend.
No problem. So let's pick back up. We were talking, we had to take a quick break, but kind of the thing that got it off to a start is, again, the timeline of when they were captured and possibly some theories on how long that they were around.
Well, yeah, and pretty much the few that actually told Fred Gerner and other researchers about what they knew was that Fred Gerner was probably beheaded very shortly after arrival there. He was not a good guest. He didn't appreciate the cuisine, and he complained quite loudly and vehemently, and the Japanese had no tolerance whatsoever, and they just cut his head off. And we have a witness named Anna Magathna, who was 7 years old at the time, who in that time period, in summer of 37, actually said that she saw a white man, a tall white man, beheaded. She was actually in the woods nearby, and she saw this happen. Okay, and this is all documented, and she took them to the gravesite in 1944. We think that the same site that she saw was excavated by Marines, and that we believe that was the gravesite where Noonan and Amelia were buried. Now, we think that she lived longer than that. We just don't know how much longer, a year, 2 years maybe. Many heard that several heard that she died of dysentery. The daughter of the chief of police on Saipan was told that she was shot as a spy because they had to take her as such. The Japanese were not nice people in those days at all, and they took her as a spy and they shot her. And she could have had dysentery and then been shot. We just don't know. We know that he certainly didn't make it to the American invasion because during the invasion in late July, early August time frame, we have the story of Griswold, Henson, and Burks. That's Tracy Griswold, who was a captain in Marine intelligence, and he took Edward Henson Jr. and Billy Burks, who were Marine privates. He took them to a spot outside of Liang Cemetery, which is one of the major cemeteries on Saipan. It was located south of Garapan, which is the capital. Now, at this cemetery, Griswold produced a map and showed them where to dig, and they dug and they excavated human remains of two individuals because there were two skulls. Now, these remains were completely skeletal. So that means, obviously, they were in the ground for a while. They didn't just recently die. And these remains were later, the same spot was later found. Well, Griswold disappeared with the remains. We don't know what happened after that, okay? Griswold, these two Marines later on, after hearing about Gerner's work and seeing the headlines and hearing about Josephine's account, in 1964, Edward Henson Jr. told a friend of Gerner's named Ross Game about this incident. They were sworn to secrecy by Griswold. After they dug up the remains, Griswold, Henson said, "What is this? Why are we doing this? And who are these people? Why are we going to all this trouble to dig up these remains?" And Griswold made the only mistake he made during the whole operation. He said, "Have you ever heard of Amelia Earhart?" And of course they did. They said,
Sure.
So he said, "Enough said." He swore them to secrecy, and neither one of them said a word about it until 1964. 20 years later, Henson contacted Gerner's friend Ross Game, the newspaper man, and Game contacted Gerner. Gerner looked into their stories, and then later on, and he believed their stories, and then he interviewed Griswold, and Griswold denied everything, but they both identified Griswold independently. They had identified his photo after not seeing him for 20 years. They both independently identified him. He was the guy they were with, and he was the officer that ordered them to do this dig. But when Gerner found Griswold, of course, Griswold, being a good Marine, disavowed the whole thing, said he never heard of these two guys and never went on any grave digging detail. Eventually, Griswold fooled Gerner into believing him. Gerner actually believed that Griswold was telling him the truth. 6 years, let's see, 4 years later, Don Cathera and his group of Clevelanders got onto the same story. They went to Saipan. Anna McGoffin took them to the spot that they believe was excavated by Griswold, Henson, and Burks, and they dug there, and they found bone fragments, 180 bone fragments. And these bone fragments could have been identified. If they had modern technology, they could have been identified right there through DNA. But this was 1968, and of course there was no such technology. And
right.
they took the bone fragments to a Ohio State anthropologist who was a bit of a, I still don't believe, well, he wasn't really a doctor. He was an honorary doctor, but he was an anthropologist. He claimed that he was a doctor, and he claimed that the bones were that of a white male and female. However, he could not have done that. They didn't have the science in those days. It was a big flap that got lots of headlines, but it's still, his findings were meaningless rather than incorrect. But the bones disappeared in 1982 when this doctor died. His name was Dr. Bobby, B-A-B-Y was his name. And those bone fragments, which could prove the actual physical presence of Earhart there, they disappeared. I think the feds got them. I really do. And they've never been found, those bone fragments. So it just goes on and on. You know, Henson and Burks are... Don Cathera, the researcher, faced off with Griswold, interviewed Griswold, and challenged him and said, you know, I know you're lying. I know you recovered the remains of Amelia Earhart. When are you going to admit it? And Griswold said, well, I really just can't. I can't admit it. You're doing a good job, but there's nothing really much I can say. He said, if you keep, and one of the lawyers said, we're going to sue you. And Cathera said, you just go right ahead. Well, I'm looking forward to the discovery phase of this lawsuit, and they never sued. Wow. So, I mean, there's so much involved with this, Pat. I mean, it's all there for anybody. This is not top secret stuff. It's there for anybody interested. And what this is all about. Let's get to the bottom line because we're running out of time. And people are always going to say. They always say whenever I talk to them, they say why. Why all the secrecy? Why does the establishment media hate Saipan so much? Why won't they talk about the Marshall Islands? Why do they always avoid that? Why all this hype about Nicomaroro? They've been there 11 times. They found nothing that connects to Amelia Earhart. They didn't even, the theory of we didn't really get into that much, but it's really not worth getting into because there's nothing there. There's just a lot of smoke, a lot of mirror, a lot of hype, a lot of hyperbole, and a lot of money. Big-time money, millions and millions of dollars have been wasted on this group, this Tigar group, going to Nicomaroro every other year for the past 30 years, 11 trips they've made, and they've never found anything that connects. This is all just nonsense. It's smoke and mirrors. It's just a way for these people. The director, his name is Rick Gillespie. He's the most well-known name in all the Earhart research of the past 30 years. That's all anybody on the street knows is Rick Gillespie.
Right,
you know.
Right.
And he's going to find Earhart. He's on her trail. You know, he's the most internationally acclaimed expert. Nonsense. It's so bogus. People in the Earhart research community, people that I know, have absolutely no regard for this guy. This guy is a Pied Piper. This guy is a charlatan, and this is how he makes his living with his 501(c) nonprofit charity organization called Tigar, the international group. I mean, and don't be surprised. There'll be another story soon. He'll have another reason to go back.
Well, I actually reached out to him, Mike, to have him on the show, and he wouldn't come on.
Oh, really? That's interesting. That's very interesting.
Now, is this the same guy that did an expedition, I believe even brought Bob Ballard, the guy who found Titanic, and Ballard, a couple days into it, said, this is nonsense, let's get the heck out of here?
I think Ballard might have gone with him on one.
Yeah.
They've been on 11 different ones. Maybe, yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Ballard, you know, he came to his senses soon enough. He just looked into it a little bit, and you know, he had nothing. He's obviously an honorable man. He's an honest man, you know. So, yeah, I think so. Must be. But anyway, the bottom line here, you know, the big why about all of this, anybody that's looked into this at all, or that's even listened to me for the last hour or two, could probably come to the obvious conclusion. There can only be one reason why this is still a sacred cow, and why this is so. Why the truth in the Earhart disappearance is so hated. It's just, the story is the most despised story in American history. And the reason is, drum roll, the reason is,
go ahead,
to protect the legacy of Franklin D. Roosevelt. That is what it's all about, and that's what it's always been about. Next to Woodrow Wilson, I guess he's one of the fathers of the modern-day Democrat Party. And I am not here to besmirch his memory. I'm here to tell the truth. And we knew, our intelligence assets knew that they had Amelia Earhart at the latest within a month of her disappearance, because we had the radio tracking capability. All the radio intercept records are gone from that time frame, from the stations in the Pacific. There's no, because they don't want researchers finding what we found. We knew that they had her. We had the capability. We had their codes broken. We had the Jap codes broken in 1937. If we would have given up that knowledge, and if we would have gone public, it would have alerted the Japanese that we had broken their codes, number one, okay? And number two, we were very weak militarily in 1937. We were not ready to face off with Japan. I'm not making any excuses for FDR whatsoever. I mean, but that's ostensibly, I can only imagine the excuses that he would have made to his inner circle about letting her out to dry. But they did not lift a finger to help her. Neither did they lift a finger to alert anybody that she was there. And that's the reason for all of this. It's so stupid. It is just so stupid. The legacy of a dead Democrat president. That's what this is all about. And because of that, and because of the historians, the spineless historians and the academic community in this country are so spineless and without any honor or courage or integrity, they just let it go. They just let it go. It's one of those, it's just, there it is. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah. Absolutely amazing.
It is. It's amazing that this story has to be told by someone like me. That nobody else will stand up like me and tell the story the way it's supposed to be told.
Well, again, my hat's off to you with all the research and all the time and effort that you've put into it. We've only got a couple minutes left, Mike. When do you anticipate the new book to be out?
Any minute now. I've been told it was supposed to be on Amazon sometime today, and today is just about over. So okay. It'll be on there soon. It'll be on Amazon.com. The second edition is far superior to the first edition. It was supposed to be a hardback, but the prices got raised so badly, the publisher told her they could not afford to put it to do a hardback. They would have had to charge $49 for a hardback, which is completely out of the range of reason. So it's a paperback, but it's a huge paperback, 7 by 10 paperback. I mean, that is huge, and it's got 2 new chapters, new photos, new analysis, new information about the Edricans. It's all rewritten. It's really nice. I'm really proud of this book. You know, I worked so hard to put it together. And it's not just a book. This is a cause. This is a cause. I mean, this poor woman's legacy has been completely ruined by the establishment's, craven cover-up of FDR's cowardice in 1937. And because of that, Amelia Earhart's been made to suffer. And the poor woman still can't rest in peace over this, you know? I mean, it's just unbelievable. Right. How much time we got, Pat?
Got about 2 minutes.
2 minutes?
Yep.
How about if I read the close of my... Well, I don't know. I don't think I should do that. Maybe not. I don't know. I don't know what. I'm pretty much worn out. I mean, I've been pretty wound up here.
You did an outstanding job, and like I said, all I can do is is really direct people to your website for sure. And again, people need to take a look at it. Mike's website is earharttruth.com. The book is Amelia Earhart, The Truth at Last. The new version will be out any day, hopefully tomorrow or Monday. Yeah. And I encourage people that follow us to look at the website and order the book and get the book and go through it. It's so interesting how you tie it all together. With just, with everything. The website, everything reads so comfortably, very understanding, and there's a lot there to absorb, without a doubt.
Thank you, Pat. Yeah, there certainly is. I mean, I would appreciate some support with this. I mean, it really, this is a worthy cause, as I said. It's a worthy cause, and what more can I say except go to the website and read it? Just read what I have and make up your own mind. Make up your own minds. Compare what I have for you, and then compare the other offerings.
Oh, without a doubt. And again, I think once people get to the website and take a look at it, they're going to appreciate it more because, again, there's so much there, and it'll make you want to get the book and find out more details.
I'm in my 28th year on this story.
Wow. Again, my hat's off to you, my friend. I'm going to wish you the best of nights. I want to thank you for staying up late and being with us, and wish you the best on the book. Let's keep in touch, and down the road, let's do it again. I will grab a book as soon as it comes out. I need some stuff to read for summer that I really I enjoy, and again, this history and again, all your work and research here is amazing, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Pat.
Okay.
God bless you.
Take care. Keep warm down there in Florida. Watch out for them hurricanes, and we'll stay in touch.
Will do. Bye-bye.
Okay, my friend.
Thanks.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.